I'm really happy on behalf of the Chocorua Lake Conservancy and the Cook Memorial Library to welcome David here tonight. David is a presenter for the Climate Reality Leadership Corps and a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby, first in their Marin County, California chapter, and now he's in the Portland, Maine chapter, where he serves as liaison to Senator Angus King. And I think he will tell you more about those organizations. David has a professional background in solar energy. He's part of the Marin Time to Lead on Climate Coalition, and he served on the Climate Adaptation Steering Committee of the Corte Madera Town Council when he served there as an elected council member. He and his family moved to Scarborough, Maine in the spring of 2021, and they have a long connection to Chocorua since 1963. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the entire Chocorua Lake Conservancy and the Cook Memorial Library staff for being so affirmative and inclusive as to reaching out to everybody and doing this. The only correction that I would make is that it's really since 1962 that our family has been blessed with a connection to Chocorua. And that I also wanted to say that I've climbed that mountain about 55 times and helped to clear the trail since early 60s and on. But we acquired our property 5 years before the founding of the Chocorua Lake Conservation Foundation, which was the predecessor organization to the CLC today. And we brought voluntarily onto our deed a collection of conservation easements, conservation rules that were later adopted by almost all of the landowners around Chocorua Lake, which is one reason why it's such a beautiful, beautiful environment. I'm going to quickly summarize a couple of the questions that came in advance. There are several good questions, and some of them are so wrapped up into the presentation itself that I'm not going to read those right now. But one of the best, and by the way, if you are interested to identify yourself as being the source of any of these questions, by all means do that. But the most challenging one has caused me to reorient some of my slides, and that is, do you see any reasons to believe that the science-backed sustainability and climate policy and legislation can be enacted in a non-polarizing way in the current US social and political culture? If so, how? That's a very challenging question. That's what I've been wrestling with for as long as I've been a part of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I think it is a very effective example of dealing with the answers to that question. But I want to address that near the beginning of the presentation, and then I want that questioner to come back if there are further parts of that question later on. Another is, what should individuals be doing now to prepare their homes and land for the flooding and droughts that are predicted for New England? I'm going to cover that a little bit as we go. Great question. Bring that question back especially if you have some ideas in solving it. There are questions about the carbon cashback model, which is a phrase from New Hampshire and Maine, both. And that is the essence of the Citizens Climate Lobby proposal. And is the renewable clean energy industry ready to take on such an ambitious goal of encouraging the use of cleaner energy? And I would say absolutely yes, but we have a lot more to do still, particularly on our grid, to expand it if we're going to be able to have as many electric vehicles as we need to have to stop the pollution that we're all contributing from the tailpipes of our vehicles. And let's see, I'm going to cover the rest as we go. And if I don't, there are 3 or 4 more excellent questions. If I don't get to you right now, bring them up a little bit later. So let me, first of all, the first bit of hopeful information addresses that first question about the really the polarizing environment that we've had. There's 1 or 2 groups in the country that have for more than a decade been tracking American attitudes towards global warming and climate change. The Yale program on climate change communications and the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication have both been tracking attitudes. And this result is from September of 2021, in which you can see now that is less than a quarter of the population is in the disengaged, I don't know, or very doubtful about global warming or dismissive. That's less than a quarter. More than 3/4 are concerned cautiously or all the way to alarm about global warming and what we're doing about it. So the fact that it is on our minds, it's in the press, it's out there as an issue is, I think, actually a very hopeful sign for where the conversation will be going. There are some other indications of hopefulness. One is that for several years, there's been a House Climate Solutions Caucus in the US House. The Senate has a Climate Solutions Caucus, which has been grown on a 2-by-2 fashion, so that there are 4 Republicans, 3 Dems, and 1 independent from Maine who are members of that Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. They only proceed in their discussions on a completely equal bipartisan fashion, and that's the way that they're acting on things like the RISE Act and the Growing Climate Solutions Act and others that are moving on a bipartisan basis. Conference of Mayors, 80% of voters wants Congress to do something and set aside their bipartisan solution, and that's from a very conservative pollster, the Luntz survey. All signs to me that there are hopeful directions of change in our political economy. Now, who are some of these radicals that are pushing for climate action? Well, really, the entire United Nations, 193 nations around the world signed on to the Paris Accords, and very quickly, and then 2 more later. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Reinsurance Association, very big on saying, Congress, we have to do something more on climate action. These are not radical organizations. The Federal Reserve has put out a paper saying that climate action is one of the most important things that is facing risks, creating risk for our banking system. We have to address it. There is a new Sustainability Accounting Standards Board to address what each major public company ought to be doing and reporting on sustainability. The world's largest asset managers out there are saying they are considering climate as a feature of the pricing of their acquisitions and dispositions in assets. The League of Women Voters, which is strenuously, and the Rotary International, both strenuously nonpartisan, have climate action as a very high priority, and by all surprising conditions, the Business Roundtable and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are entities that have said, these are important developments that are happening, and we need to start working, and the government needs to start taking action. So it is not a split, I would say. It is not really a polarized conversation as you might think. Behind the scenes, there's really quite a bit. I'm going to get back to that topic a little bit later, but first into my traditional part of the beginning of my presentation, which is the IPCC. Anybody know what that means? It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the panel of a couple of thousand scientists who boil their work down every couple of years and put out a report summarizing where we are. And in 2021, they had several reports, one of which was summary for policymakers. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, that's the frozen parts of the planet, and biosphere have occurred. That is what is the scientific consensus. There is no more disagreement among scientists. That is the scientific consensus that exists out there. Another completely non-political fact is that 15 of the hottest years on record have occurred since 2005. 19 of the 20 hottest years have occurred since the year 2000. And guess what? The hottest of all have been the last 6 years. 2021 came in as, according to NASA and NOAA and a couple of others that track this, 2021 came in as the 6th hottest year in the atmosphere. And what have all these higher temperatures led to? You know this, wildfires, 6 years of California wildfires, almost 5 million acres burned, unprecedented change in the way that California lives. And in 2020, 4 million acres in just 1 year, the worst ever, 23 deaths. It is not a simple or ignorable feature. And where does all that heat go? When the heat doesn't always stay in the atmosphere. It's constantly shifting, and there's cold days and warm days, but 90% of the heat gain has been stored in the oceans. It's the big, slow thermal battery of our planet, which of course, as everybody knows, covers 72% of the Earth's surface, but the water is what's warmest. And guess what? NOAA has reported that all of the ways and places that they measure temperature have added up to 2021 being the highest, record highest annual ocean temperatures. And that is a steadily increasing number, not going away. Well, so what? What's the consequence of that? One is loss of corals. Corals are in some ways the architecture of the fundament of life in our shores around the world. And if you want to know more about this rather disastrous trend, which is, some have said have led to the loss of almost 50% of the coral reefs around the world, watch the Netflix, the movie Chasing Coral on Netflix. It's devastating. And there's another, a free entity called earthxtv.com, and they have Our Living Oceans, a whole series of reporting carefully around the world, a number of different scientists tracking what's happening. It's really important to pay attention to, because the ocean produces half of the oxygen that we breathe. The ocean is a natural sink for carbon dioxide. The oceans are a result of the increased temperature, also increasing in acidity, and that has helped to change fish populations. Yes, that's one of the questions we have gotten. Changed fish and shellfish populations around the world, and leading to shifting that has been unprecedented. Another thing that happens when the oceans are warmer is that there are more frequent, more powerful storms that gather strength. And in recent years, this is 4 or 5 hurricanes at the same time in 2020, piling towards the southern United States. At the very same time that all of that heat is leading to events in our oceans, it is leading to record droughts. And again, NOAA, the folks who track for all of us, global average temperatures and so forth, have tracked temperature and precipitation. And this graph shows precipitation in the dark line and temperature in the red line. And notice how in recent years they have diverged. The hotter it has become, the more drought conditions, particularly in the West, as far as the United States is concerned, in the West. And this is just a map of drought level as of last August. It is not a map of temperatures. Some of the exceptionally high temperatures that occurred last summer in Seattle, Washington, 115 degrees, in Portland, Oregon, 116 degrees, in parts of British Columbia, over 120 degrees. These are temperatures that naturally cause the demise of chickens. And most people can't work outside or really think straight, in my case, when it's that hot. So it's a mixture of droughts. Now, we in the East have been largely immune and largely protected from those droughts, but we're not guaranteed to be. And just to get down real close and personal, in Northern California, most of the reservoirs were at record low levels by August, September, October of last year. Rather scary levels. And we're not alone. It's not just us in the United States. The Guardian is one of the best publications in tracking climate news. And they reported 3 years ago, Himalayan glacier melting has doubled since the year 2000. Ice losses indicate devastating future for 1 billion people who depend upon the Himalayan ice for water. That is not an insignificant thing for the globe to think about. Greenland typically melts at about 300, a rate of about 300 or under 300 gigatons of ice a year. Starting in 2019, over 400 gigatons a year. There have been a number of analyses of how much ice has been lost in the glaciers and in the poles, and it's mostly the earth. I'm sorry, it's the land-based ice that we should be concerned about, because that's what causes sea level rise. But again, a rather gargantuan amount of loss of ice. What happens if all of Greenland melts? This is what happens in Florida if it's just 18 feet of sea level rise. And if all of Greenland melts, it's projected to be about 20 or 20 plus feet. That's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of real estate that are gone. And what happens to all of those people? They become climate migrants. It's not just the southern parts. Alaska is an example of a place where the melting of permafrost, in fact, the northern climes closer to the Arctic have warmed more than southern climes. 8-9 degrees average increase in temperature. And that, what does that mean? Permafrost is melting. 31 communities on the coast have to be relocated in Alaska. This is something that's the highest priority for the Republican governor and representatives and senators from Alaska. What's the cause? You know this, but I just gotta say, we are all contributors. There's not just a few evil companies, it's us. Look at us. And it is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And this is the most objective tracing place for the atmosphere's CO2 levels is considered to be the Mauna Loa Observatory, because it's 2/3 of the way across the Pacific. The air's mix, it's not next to a group of cities. So this is really considered the easiest and best, most authentic place to measure the average level of atmospheric CO2. And it has been steadily climbing. What are those wiggly lines? The scientist who started graphing this, Mr. Keeling, this is called the Keeling curve, and that's because the Earth breathes every year. That the northern hemisphere loses its deciduous leaves and its method of taking in and leaving off carbon dioxide. And as of June of 2021, 419 parts per million. This is 50% more than the average, the historical average. Somebody asked the question of, well, how does this actually function? I think this is sort of basic, very basic, but greenhouse gases form a layer that's not unlike the thin layer of the top of a greenhouse that lets in sunlight and traps the infrared end of the spectrum and warms up the inside of a greenhouse. The exact same phenomenon has happened, and that was identified in the 1800s as being a phenomenon that is likely to happen the more CO2 and other greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere. And that radiation of the long wave stays with us and has constantly heated up the surface and then the oceans. That's the greenhouse gas effect, or the greenhouse effect. Now, we have been able to track, we humans have been able to track by digging into the ice cores of Antarctica, the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere over 400,000 years. And it shows a cyclical pattern, but a rather steady cyclical pattern. This is the last ice age up here, 20,000 years ago, and look what's happened now. For about 3 million years, it has never been as high as it is today. And notice that for at least 400,000 years, it's never gone over 300 parts per million. The average is more like 240 across all those. But as starting with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it has been accelerated. Now let's dig into this just a little bit deeper. This is graph that see the same pattern, the cyclical pattern of over hundreds of thousands of years of CO2 concentration from the same ice cores, the pattern of temperatures and melting and icing over of the surface of the earth, and then sea level rise from a lot of different geological records around the world. And notice how much correlation there is in the pattern of those lines, except for one area. Can you see it? This is a total anomaly. CO2 concentration is way out of line. What does that mean? Will it recover? Can we cause it to recover? Will the rest of these curves follow suit? And there will be a colossal increase in global average temperature and sea level rise. That's the question the scientific community is constantly asking, and some have come up with preliminary answers. And one, John Englander, is seen to be one of the major authorities around the world, has said the last time the present CO2 levels, today's CO2 levels, were reached, the oceans were up to 20 meters or about 65 feet higher than they are today. So remember, the ocean is a slow-moving thermal battery that stores all of that energy, and it's not going to give it off anytime soon. And by the way, the CO2 isn't going away. The half-life of CO2 means that it will remain in the atmosphere for a millennium, unless we do new means of taking it out of the atmosphere. What does 65 feet of sea level rise look like in New England? And somebody asked the question of, is climate change going to affect sea life? Well, yes, sea life and land life. Notice Boston, this is Boston, Boston is down here, Newburyport, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, going up to Portland, Maine. I've circled Tamworth and Scarborough because we live both in Tamworth and Chocorua and in Scarborough. And you see, Tamworth is not going to be affected by sea level rise. Scarborough sure as heck is. And think of all the hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure in place, of human activity that will be in danger, or theoretically is in danger today if today's level of CO2 continues to be allowed to be in our atmosphere. So again, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put it very plainly at the end of last year, in the end of their report last year. Global surface temperatures will continue to increase until at least the mid-century under all emission scenarios considered. Global warming of 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade will be exceeded during the 21st century unless deep reductions in CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions occur in the coming decades. So that's our challenge. That's what we need to do. So we have a choice. Do we just proceed as usual and pretend that nothing's wrong, or do we take strong national, international, and personal climate actions? I'm going to say that we need to take really strong action at the national level. I would be very interested to know how many of you agree with that, and I want to hear from you back to the extent to which you also agree with that. And then as we think about what we might do, there are a lot of different ways that we might go about it. Well, what are the sort of core principles for success that maybe could get around the issue of our recently very polarized politics? Well, a large-scale reduction in fossil fuels is needed as soon as possible. The scientific community has made that perfectly clear. We need to start drawing down CO2 out of the atmosphere, not just reducing the amount that we put in, but drawing it down. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So big investments are going to be needed. In order to make that happen, we need to be fair and balanced and pursue equity and political, and that will lead to political durability of any solution, so that we don't have one administration doing this and the next doing that, and the next doing this and the next doing that. We need to take steps that really do have durability. I think a way to make sure that is the case is to support free choice and support the economy and jobs, and also take actions that will tend to bring other countries along with us, because we're not alone. Other countries are at least one of them is polluting more than we are these days, and we need to make sure that the actions that we take will stimulate positive success. Well, who do we turn to give us answers about what actions should we really take? In 2018, Janet Yellen, then former chair of the Federal Reserve and now our US Secretary of the Treasury, said, from the standpoint of an economist, the most efficient way to tackle climate change is to tax emissions, to create a disincentive to emit carbon dioxide. And she wasn't alone. Over 3,500 economists in the United States alone have signed a statement of support for this. And this includes people from both political parties, all 4 current and former chairs of the Federal Reserve, 27 Nobel laureates, 15 chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors from both parties, from both sets of presidents, well, with the exception of one in the last 30 years. And this consensus among economists, when was the last time you had 3 economists agreeing on what is a proper solution going forward, let alone 3,500? This is a level of consensus among economists that's just as strong as the consensus among climate scientists. So we really need to be paying attention to this idea of taxing carbon. And are we alone in this? No, 40 countries already have some form of carbon tax or carbon pricing or cap and trade. The UK put on a carbon tax about 5 years ago, and there's been the near disappearance of coal. Sweden, for almost 2 decades, has had a price on carbon and has now reached the highest level of any country in the world. And guess what? Their economy has been booming. Canada, 2 provinces had carbon taxes in place of different kinds. So they have decided to make it a national policy. And later this year, they will be starting to rebate back the amount of money that's collected from the polluting companies, the fossil fuel companies, much the same way as the solution that I'm about to describe. Scientists like James Hansen, leaders from both political parties and from the business community, George Shultz, Elon Musk, have made statements about it. It's not simple, but it's very clear. Tax carbon is one of the first things that we need to do. And by the way, 94 members of the US House of Representatives have co-sponsored a bill to do exactly this. One of those is Representative Annie Kuster from New Hampshire. 2 are in Maine, but 49 senators so far have also agreed and have signed on. So this is not something that's a dream. This is in the process. It is in the works. It's something that is within reach. And if you want more information, look at that list. Now, okay, is it both parties? Well, one of the things that I say if I am having the conversation with a conservative member of Congress is 3/4 of young Republicans see climate change as a very serious threat. By the way, Ipsos survey is a conservative leaning survey organization. Does your party have a future if you don't take this into consideration? And more specifically, carbon pricing and returning the revenue to households has 3/4 support from Republicans under 40. Again, it's a conservative leaning survey group that's come up with that. So who is Citizens Climate Lobby, who has been pushing this for a dozen years? It's a grassroots volunteer organization. I'm a volunteer, and it is designed to create the political will to address climate change with a national carbon fee and dividend policy. In 2019, the last time was pre-pandemic meetings. This is a real photograph of us. I was one of the people up there very near the very top, near the very top of that group, near the guy with the hat on. It has more than 200,000 supporters around the world and 600 chapters around the world, covering over 90% of US congressional districts. So it's not an insignificant group. What is the actual solution? It's called a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend with a border adjustment. Revenue neutral, what is that? It doesn't add to the deficit. The money that comes in goes out. We're not growing government. It's a carbon fee. Yes, it's a tax on the problem. And it's a dividend. It's the idea is to take 98% of the money and send it out to everybody equally. With a border adjustment, and what is a border adjustment? A border adjustment is a tariff on those countries that are trying to import materials, products, tires, fuels, you name it, into the United States, the biggest economy still in the world. If they're a non-carbon tax country, then we would have a tariff on those items so that they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I still want to sell to the US economy. Do I want to pay them to do it, or do I want to collect my own carbon tax in order to do it? They're going to start wanting to step up their own carbon tax in order to continue to sell into the US marketplace. Very specifically, how does it work? Starting on the lower left, the companies that are pulling coal, oil, and gas out of the earth or importing it into the country will pay a tax equal in the first year under this proposal, $15 per ton equivalent to the Treasury. The Treasury does not keep it. It doesn't send it to the EPA or to anybody else or to any of my friends. It sends it in checks just like Social Security to everybody equally. Yes, there may be an increased cost of carbon intensive products, gasoline at the pump, but those folks who think twice about the check that they're getting every month versus what their behavior is will start to realize they can increase and improve their own household income by buying more green products and getting away from fossil intensive, lowering their carbon footprint. That's the engine of change. How does it affect folks in our economy? This is a graph from the lowest income to the highest income individuals. And this is just a percent. This is not an amount of money. This is a percent of their income change as a result of the dividend. The people in the lowest deciles will have a higher percentage change of their income by the level payment that's given out to everybody individually. And those who have 2, 3 houses, 2, 3, 4 vehicles, or take a lot of plane flights will net be behind because they will be paying more for those products and that lifestyle. So in this way, it is a progressive thing. And this is not the source of this information isn't a volunteer group. It's the Office of Tax Analysis in the US Treasury. Independent research by the Nature Climate Change folks have said, we show that an equal part per capita refund of carbon tax revenues implies that achieving the targets of holding under 2 degrees centigrade increase can pay large and immediate dividends for improving the well-being, reducing inequality, and alleviating poverty. Answer me this: which is more expensive, a carbon tax or not having any action? What is the relative cost of a carbon tax and the cost of climate inaction? I think you can guess where we're going with this. A carbon tax total cost in the first year, a little under $90 billion. The average cost of climate disasters, as measured in, I'll show you in a second, is over $300 billion. NOAA, again, has been tracking not just the amount of heat and the amount of carbon dioxide, but they've also been tracking a number of billion-dollar events, that's on the left, and the cost of those climate disaster events that can be identified with 95% confidence interval to be climate related events is quite dramatic. And the first year of carbon tax is way, way less than that. Carbon fees will slash emissions. Current policy, we are actually reducing our production of carbon dioxide a little bit, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of less transportation and less economic activity in the last couple of years. But we're not doing what we need to do. We need to do a whole lot more. And a carbon fee and dividend it is projected by independent economists, be very effective, 40% less carbon emissions over the next 12 years. And what's the cash for carbon? Somebody raised the question. It is paid monthly to everybody with a social security number. Half share for children under 18, sorry. But it is equal, so it is fair. Those whose total purchases contain less than the average amount of carbon will be net gainers. Those who are heavy on what they do, as I said, who have more than 3 houses and so forth, will be net payers. The dividend will be taxed as income, and thus it is just as progressive as the individual income tax is. What else is the result? Jobs are created, over 2 million jobs in 10 years by the innovation and change that will occur in businesses responding to this price change. So just remember this Citizens Climate Lobby solution. It's a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend with a border adjustment that will reduce America's carbon pollution by half. It is not enough. If we don't do anything, the projected future temperature is going to be up in the red zone. If we take significant actions, which look as though they may be commencing around the world, we'll be in the blue zone, still going up. If we take dramatic measures to reduce the additions of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we will lower the increase of pain, but we're still above 2 degrees centigrade, which if you look around, all of those disaster slides that I first showed are happening when we're just pushing up against 1.5 degrees. So we need more than that. And this is where we wanted to talk about climate restoration. We've already filled the bathtub of heat to over 50% of the historic level. Remember the graphs of the historic level of CO2 and temperature? We've already filled the bathtub. Well, governments have begun to do adaptation, and the US government is one, and a number of states. They want to defend the shores. They want to defend us by teaching us how in effect, we can swim in the heat in the tub. I've been promoting here with the Citizens Climate Lobby solution mitigation. That is, we want to get to a point of less pain by reducing the flow of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and reducing the amount of new hot water in the tub. But remember, the carbon dioxide isn't going anywhere, and the heat in the ocean isn't going anywhere. So we need then to turn also to climate restoration, which will correct the problem by reducing the hot water in the tub to safe levels. I can't wait to talk more about that solution in our next session. But the short version that you should take away from this presentation is, along with adaptation, that many governments are already undertaking. Think of Miami has already put in hundreds of millions of dollars into check valves in their wastewater and stormwater drainage, so that the water will go out and not come back in those drains. There already are increases in the levees in a number of parts of our coastline. So we're already doing defense. We need to step up mitigation, and then we need to proceed into restoration. It's the three-legged stool of solutions that we really need to undertake. Now, one of the great questions was, what can I do as a private citizen, as an individual? Well, there's a lot you can do. Drive an electric vehicle, or walk, or ride a bike. Put solar on it and use less energy. Solar, by the way, is made with materials that are non-toxic. It's made essentially with sand and copper, silicon and copper. That is most of the solar cells that are made today. There are new ones coming along that are even more efficient and take up less real estate to produce the energy, or simply conserve, use less. In New Hampshire, call for a stronger renewable portfolio standard. The current law in New Hampshire, as I understand it, was passed in 2007, and it says by 2025, there shall be an available set of renewable energy certificates for purchase by individuals, by the utilities, selling by the utilities, which amount to 25% of the total amount of energy that we produce. That's nowhere near good enough. That standard is a very low standard compared to national standards in a number of other states. RPS, or renewable portfolio standards, are much stronger in other states, and that's something that is ripe for action in New Hampshire. Urge New Hampshire to allow community solar, something we have in Maine, which works very well. If you have a lot of houses that are in the woods, thankfully shaded and comfortable in the woods, you can't have solar on them. So you find a field, a place, an old dump, an old coal yard, an old whatever, fill it with solar panels and have that be owned by individuals with virtual net metering, and that's called community solar. We're owners of a 7 kW community solar farm on a organic farm in Knox, Maine. Change your diet, reduce your waste, and stop wasting as much food. What you see as a double hamburger is actually something that the Amazon is burning down for in order to have more space for raising beef and growing soy to feed Americans. We are part of the problem. So there's a very obvious solution for us individuals. Electric vehicles are numerous now, and there's not just these really wonderful Teslas and Volvos and Jaguars and so forth and BMWs. There are also the Hyundais and Nissans and Toyotas and Volkswagens and vehicles of lesser price that will have increasing range and do not pollute. There are a lot of natural solutions, reforestation. There are a lot of things that you can do or can be done without buying any new equipment. One of them that is very, very promising is increased kelp farming, but certainly plant-rich diets. And there's more to be said about nature's solutions. It's not just technical solutions. So, what can CLC do? What can other local groups do? And how can you think about creating the political will, solving the problem that was first posed in that wonderful question of enhancing legislation, enacting legislation in a non-polarizing way? Well, you can endorse the concept of carbon fee and dividend straight up. Nonprofits can endorse policies as long as they're not excessively selfish and benefit everyone. Nonprofits can endorse policies like a carbon fee and dividend. A town can endorse a resolution, and there are some towns in New Hampshire which are endorsing carbon cashback resolutions. There's 28 in Maine, including some conservative ones who have endorsed carbon cashback for me resolutions that say, members of Congress, pass a carbon fee and dividend bit of legislation. You can pursue a climate restoration resolution. Don't think about any other details. Just say, we want to restore our climate to the way it was when we were born. We want to take carbon down to 300 parts per million or less. And so you can call your senators and representatives, write to the White House, promote individual actions. I have shared with the library, and I'll be happy to share with anybody else, resources on climate, online resources, including these. If you are in the position of still having, let's say, real doubts about the scientific consensus that I have said is consensus, look at skepticalscience.com, because they dig into all the different theories that are put forward in in arguing that, oh, no, it's not unique, or I'm sorry, it's not universal, it's not a monopoly, it's actually still a matter of disagreement. Well, skepticalscience.com will answer your skeptical questions. That's the way to find Citizens Climate Lobby. This is the way to find the climate restoration folks, Foundation for Climate Restoration.org. Climate Reality is responsible for several of the slides that I put together, and I had training by them. And there's also the Energy Innovation Act, shows you the 94 members of Congress that are behind that piece of legislation right now. There's some wonderful books, and I'm hoping that the library will have at least one of all of these. The top one is not out yet. It comes out next month. It's going to be called The Climate Restoration Imperative by an inventor named Peter Fikowski, who I've known for a number of years. He used to be an active volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby until he decided to go big on climate restoration. But these are all terrific, meaningful, worthwhile reads. And I urge you to take a look, and I'd be happy to share that list. It's very difficult for me to share all of these slides because it's too big a presentation, but I will be happy to share these lists with anybody. And now I just want to stop and say, let's go to questions. I'm going to let me see if there's something else that, oh, I know, this is, yes. I'm hoping that Wharton is still on. There is national source of information on Citizens Climate Lobby, and there's also a Lakes Region Citizens Climate Lobby chapter. They meet via Zoom at 7 p.m. on Tuesdays, the Tuesday after the second Saturday of each month. And those are the names of the co-chairs of that. And Wharton, I believe, is on the call, and he's from Sandwich. So you can ask Wharton a question if you wish. Now I'm going to stop sharing and go back to look at everybody and see what sorts of questions that people might have. And just raise your hand. And by the way, Juno, have there been any other written questions that have flown in as we have been going? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Juno.
Sorry about that. There's a number of interesting comments. Wharton has put his email in the chat box if anybody would like it. There is a question. Jennifer asks, what about a financial incentive versus a tax?
So who pays is the question. Who pays the financial incentive? This is a tax on the problem. This isn't a tax on you and me and everybody. This is a tax on those who are pulling fossil fuels out of the ground. So it is a way to level the playing field and put some of the pain that has existed in our health and our livelihoods and our storm response back into where the problem is. And so it's a tax on fossil fuel producers. It is not a tax per se on each of us. And the incentive, one of the reasons why we're not saying, and it's a perfectly legitimate thing to say, and a lot of people will say this, well, let's take that money that you take from the bad guys and give it to the good guys. Give it to the solar companies and the wind companies. Well, I'm, as a former executive of a solar company, I would say, we don't need a subsidy, a further subsidy like that. We're already less expensive than coal. We're already less expensive than gas and diesel fuel in those few islands of the US that are still using diesel fuel to produce electricity. What we need is to have the playing field leveled up. Right now, we're still subsidizing oil and gas removal from the ground. That subsidy should stop, and they should start to be taxed on a per ton basis and spread the benefit equally everywhere. And let people make their own free choice decisions and be empowered individually. Next question.
So I have some of the questions that I sent you beforehand. I don't see more questions coming in right now. If you would like to ask a question,
okay,
person, you can raise your hand.
Mark had asked a couple of good questions. incentive to use cleaner energy if we pass a carbon cashback or a carbon fee and dividend, yes, it will provide an incentive to use renewable energy, because that will be even lower in cost, and that will benefit us because it will be a lower cost solution. And he asks, is the renewable clean energy industry ready to take on such an ambitious goal? Well, wind has been growing like topsy and is the least expensive on a per megawatt basis production technique. And it is, wind is now a very significant part of the energy generation in states like Iowa and Kansas and Texas. These are not the liberal bastions of San Francisco and New York. This is right down the center of the country, and it is a very powerful, efficient solution. Offshore wind is even has even more promise, partly because it's location closer to more of the people of the United States and the cities of the United States. And so Maine is often referred to as the Saudi Arabia of wind if we start using that resource more. So the renewable energy industry is ready to scale further. It's already over 20% of our total generation, but it takes time for that increase to happen. There are, I hate to say it, but natural gas is a bridge fuel, a bridge solution until we can get to the point in time when we can use all renewable sources. And another part of Mark's question was differentiate between renewable and clean and green. Well, green is a very general term that anybody can say, and is often associated with greenwashing. I mean, I can say, well, I helped a number of schools go green when I provided solar energy for them, and they saved money at the same time, but it's not very specific. Renewable energy has a definition, unfortunately, that's different depending upon what state you live in. And renewable energy is, generally speaking, the clean energy source, but some states, like the one that I used to live in, do not define greenhouse gas-free energy as renewable necessarily. That nuclear energy is greenhouse gas-free after you build the plant. There are no deaths associated with nuclear energy in the United States since the early 1960s. It does not produce carbon dioxide. It is a greenhouse gas free, a GHG free or clean fuel generation source. It doesn't happen to be an inexpensive one. It doesn't happen to be one that we can insure carefully. And it has the associated problem of the old technologies of nuclear are able to be stretched into bomb making technologies. Newer ones like thorium fusion cannot be used for fissionable bomb making materials. So thorium is very promising if we can get ourselves off of our own high horses of cleanness and allow that research to proceed. I think I've gone a little bit too far in that. Are there any other questions that we want to get to?
Well, there's a question about what people can do to prepare their homes and lands for flooding and drought.
Yeah, and I would say that excuse me, those of us who live on the shore have a much bigger concern about that. We're fortunately half a mile back from the shore, but as I showed on the map, Tamworth and vicinity doesn't have a major risk unless we start having a shift again in the climate such that we are going to have droughts. And that's entirely possible for us to either have more drought or indeed more inundation of storms. Because one of the aspects of climate change is that normal rhythms of change of weather and annual climate have now become very steep changes. And that's why you have in one year, the hottest temperatures ever measured in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and the coldest temperatures ever measured in Texas, because the polar vortex has shifted and the way that temperature and climate and weather maintains itself has gone haywire. And that could mean almost anything for New England. The coast is let's say at the most risk, but it could be indeed, the coast could indeed be, or inland could indeed be at some risk. So it does. Is there any further question along that line? Oh, John Cleveland has pointed out that yes, if we're going to have begin to have more wildfires, then having a wildfire perimeter around your home is an excellent idea. This is something that everybody is asked to follow in California now, and Fire Safe Marin was actually one of the first real professional efforts to put out standards for keeping your home safe in the event of wildfire. And obviously removing very pyrophytic plants like juniper bushes and other that are close to your house is critical to do if you want to defend your own house from the spread of wildfire. The typical spread of wildfire isn't a burning tree falling. It is actually embers blowing from an enhanced wind that almost horizontally through and coming in vents and coming into portions of your house. If you store a lot of wood conveniently right at your porch or on your porch, that's a source of ignition that you might want to try to remove. In the long run, having fire safe materials on the outside of your house all around is a very good notion. Certainly remove any shingle shakes off from your roof. That's kindling. John, thank you for that in the chat.
So there's a few questions all in different arenas. There's a question about how this is affecting fisheries.
Yeah, and the change in fisheries has been pretty dramatic. In Maine, shrimp industry has been decimated. There are a lot of changes in species, and there's been overall, partly from overfishing and partly from the warming of waters and the pollution of waters, there's been a real decline in the populations of fish and health of fish. Again, look at the Living Oceans series on the Climate X TV series. There is a huge change, and we can start to correct that. And the climate restoration folks have a solution which is actually pretty cool. If you take a form of iron that is volatilizable, iron is a very prevalent material or mineral in the Earth's surface, and it is very present in the oceans. If you seed the ocean with iron, and I'm not talking about the shores, but out in the open oceans, you can greatly enhance the growth of phytoplankton, which again produce half of the oxygen that we breathe, and feed fish, and will increase fish populations. And the success of fish populations will pay for itself. We also, as we change our diets and move away from red meat and towards more seafood, we're going to need some additional product. And so we've got to think about ways that we can use biomimicry and natural solutions that will enhance fish populations without negatively affecting anything else. And one of the questions that came from people is from an individual in advance was, what can we do in a way that isn't just technology and bring the human world into harmony with the earth? We absolutely, as the late E.O. Wilson wrote very effectively, need to change the way we balance our life on Earth, and we need to think about preserving much more of the Earth's surface and the ocean surface than we do now, and really adjust our alignment with the natural systems of the Earth. Without question, But the same questioner said we need to be careful about having vulnerable humans mining toxic materials for solar collectors and batteries. As it happens, yes, batteries are a concern, and yet solar collectors are made mostly of sand, glass that is, and copper. It's not toxic. Solar panels are one of the great non-toxic solutions. Batteries, on the other hand, which we need storage. Storage can be done with gravity. Storage can be done thermally. Storage can be done with batteries. But we need more inventions, folks, in those lines. And we also need to make sure that we're not, let's say, urging the imprisonment of people to take cobalt out of Africa. Let's see, somebody asked how much of recent fires in the West affected our weather. I'm afraid that question is backwards. It's the weather that has affected the wildfires, as I think the evidence shows. It's the climate that has affected the weather, that has increased the drought and increased the temperatures that have made wildfires ever so much more destructive. And that has that's the sort of sequence of cause. And yes, did everybody see how orange the sky got in Chocorua last summer for a couple of weeks? That was all the product of burning forests in California and Oregon and Idaho and so forth in the West, coming all the way across the country. It was, to me, that was just viscerally awful and moving. Other questions?
Let's have Wharton ask a question, and then we have more in the chat box.
Yes, yeah, and again, Wharton is co-chair of the Lakes Region of Citizens Climate Lobby. Go for it.
Yeah, I really wanted to make a plug for one thing, which is a warrant article which has been introduced in Sandwich to request, to basically endorse carbon fee and dividend or carbon cashback on behalf of the town of Sandwich. And that would be sent to our federal legislators if it passes. So if you are in Sandwich, please come to the town meeting on March 12th and vote yes on that warrant article. So that's one plug I wanted to give. And the other is that there is a resolution that will be voted on shortly in the House of Representatives, the New Hampshire House, which is an anti-climate tax, carbon tax resolution. And it's likely to go along very strongly partisan lines, and the Republicans have the majority, but it's important for all of us in New Hampshire to speak out before this vote. It's called HR 17. And if you're able to talk to your legislators here in New Hampshire and ask them to vote no on HR 17, because it would send exactly the wrong message that would tie the hands of our federal legislators and shy them away from doing really the things that David was talking about. Yeah. That we really need for climate.
It's so ironic because New Hampshire, most of New England is not actually a place where we're drilling a lot of oil and gas or removing coal. So we're not paying that tax. We would be benefiting that tax. In fact, the projections are that rural areas in the country, like most of New Hampshire and Maine, will come out ahead with a carbon fee and dividend plan. We will come out ahead because we're not paying, we are benefiting from a carbon fee and dividend plan. As a matter of fact, Wharton, several years ago, there was I think a Texas oil man, a Republican in the House of Representatives who put forward a resolution saying, never a carbon tax. And Citizens Climate Lobby took that as being, hey, we're being heard. They're now feel threatened. So this is a sign of success. But that resolution got something like 120 votes or something like that in the House. The next time it was proposed, it got 60 votes. The next time it was proposed, it got like 24 votes. And so they pulled it. So it is actually a solution that is very much on the radar of conservatives. Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, even Lindsey Graham from South Carolina have said very positive things about a carbon tax, especially if it's combined with a dividend so that it will grow jobs and not hurt individuals. So it's very ironic, and it's just, that is such a backward thing. Thank you very much for bringing that forward, Warden. It's such a backward way to go. Anybody else? Oh, by the way, there's a comment that John Cleveland made in the chat about species of trees, and is it premature for us to think about sort of getting ahead of the planting of certain species of trees? I would say nowhere near is it ahead. Think of the time that it takes for a tree to mature. So if you want to have tree solutions that are both defensive and also good for the climate, by all means, start those now. One of the reasons that the Foundation for Climate Restoration is not wild about saying, well, just plant more trees, is because A, it takes long. B, it's not permanent. Trees have a natural cycle. They take in carbon dioxide to make their structure, but eventually it is returned to the rest of the atmosphere. So it's not permanent, but it's definitely popular, and it's something that places that have been doing much too much deforestation really need to pay attention to. Other questions?
There's a question, do you support thermal biomass heat production and or biomass energy production?
Thank you, Mark, for that question. And first of all, I want to wind back one step because it's not all just about electrification. I mean, electrification is a very hopeful thing because it's so fluid, it's so liquid, it's so controllable, and the source of it, the generation of it, can be really focused on clean sources. But that's not all the energy that we use. We also use thermal energy of different ways, and biomass, that is, if you happen to actually have waste wood, waste biomass, or if you are, let's say, in a marsh area and you have a lot of marsh grass that is able to be harvested, and you can utilize that to good effect to create energy instead of pulling it out of the ground and putting it into the air. You're still burning something, so it's not the perfect solution, but it is net a better solution. I would say that the problem is that once you start a biomass plant that is going to burn, let's say, waste products, there is a temptation to then turn and say, well, we don't have enough waste products. Let's start taking down some trees and put them into the system to generate energy. And that would be a negative. That would definitely be a negative. So I don't know quite how to, I know how to go up to a very positive point, but not beyond that positive point. But I will also say for thermal solutions, one of the things that we don't do enough of, and one of our daughters who took a lot of physics said, you know, the answer for warming properties is geothermal, and you don't have to be near a volcanic structure. You can install geothermal energy anywhere that you can get deep enough to get down to where it's about 52 degrees to 55 degrees, constant temperature throughout the year, and then put a heat pump on that, and you can both heat and cool any building on the surface for very little energy. And there's a community college in northern Marin County that installed a pretty expensive underground heat pump when it was building a couple of new buildings. They're saving $500,000 a year in heat costs, and it's completely clean, ground source heat pump. So Mark, I'm sorry, if you have a further question or a follow-on or a thought about that you want to put forward. Yes, my daughter's recommending an additional book, which is Richard Powers' Overstory, which is just a phenomenal book about how to respect the forest life in our planet and the life of non-tree species in the soils and so forth. It's a phenomenal book. We should be adding to the and John is saying amazing book. Any other questions? Another is the individual who asked the question about utility companies becoming part of the solution on the call. If you are, put your hand up, and I hope I sent a 9-point answer to that wonderful question to that individual. A lot of different things that utility companies can do, from changing its contracts of where it gets its energy to adding more storage solutions, to separating off, instead of having just one central plant and then huge transmission lines and then lots of little distribution, separating it off and have safer, smaller distributed energy solutions around. So utility companies can absolutely be part of the solution should they choose to. We have all, in our way of organizing the political economy around utility companies, have kind of made it very difficult for them these days, when we decentralized and deregulated utilities and didn't allow them to be actual producers of energy, but really just of the wires and towers and distribution and transmission. It has sort of handicapped them from some of the solutions, but they're not out of it. And we have all sorts of things that we can do to urge utility companies to be part of the answer, as well as oil and gas companies. And they are already starting to be part of the answer. Alternative fuels and a variety of different things. Any other questions? Comments? All right, what did I do wrong?
Maybe it's what you did right. I will collect all of these good resources, the links on the slides and the book references, and share them with everybody.
Fantastic.
So you'll be able to access them.
Fantastic. And by the way, a not small part of the overall solution is land trusts on the model of the Chocorua Lake Conservancy, which have steadily increased their scope and persuaded all landowners to be part of the answer and part of the solution, and not make things worse for your neighbors, either visually or from air pollution or noise or water pollution's point of view. And it's a great model. If there's anybody on the call who is wondering what they might do in their local community, a land trust much like the Chocorua Lake Conservancy is a really good way to go, especially if you can find high talents like Juno and Lynn Flaccus, who's about to leave us, unfortunately, but great naturalists.
We could do a whole program just on that nature solutions slide.
Mm-hmm. I knew you would say that.
I mean, that was so much. There was so much in there.
Yep.
So more to be continued. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure, absolutely. And
all of this and sharing it.
And I do want honest commentary. If I went too fast, if I was too confusing, I do want honest commentary back from anybody. It helps me improve. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, David.
Thank you, Warden.
Yeah,
Good
thank
meet.
you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. And Mary, yes, I will. I'll send the book list along.
Oh yes, Mary Cronin of the Cook Memorial Library. Thank you very much for the venue and for your support of this. It's really appreciated. And if you have further questions about authors and writing and whatnot, there's a longer list. Thank you.
I'm going to put, just for the people that are left, I'll put in the chat if I can access it. This is one way you can give some feedback, is with this link here. And your daughter has committed to giving you feedback
Yes, I know.
Of course.
in public, she made a public commitment. Yeah, there's a link there too. If people want to have just a couple of comments, you can put it in there and I'll share it along to David. Thank you all so much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Nice to see faces. Thank you,
It's-
David.
Thank you. And thanks to those who made helpful comments and suggestions during the presentation. That's really terrific.